Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I set out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a quite temperate Thursday morning here in suburban Chicago. It's July 29th, which means that it's Gen Con time. One of my friends posted that if this had been a normal year, he and his daughter would have been walking the exhibit hall at Gen Con today. And I realized the same is true for me. Although we would have been in the playtest hall, I'm sad to be missing it. It was looking to be a good year for us at Gen Con this year. That said, we are participating in Gen Con online. My design partner Rob and I are hosting two board game trivia shows called Game Fight Quiz Show. That are being supported or broadcast by XYZ Game Labs. And you can look for those events in the Gen Con online schedule. So I hope that if you get a chance, you can come out. One of them is tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. The other is Sunday at 4 or 5 p.m. Eastern. All right, well, today I am going to continue the epic saga of talking about mechanisms and my favorite game within each mechanism. Based on the suggestions or selections that were brought up over in our guild at Board Game Geek, guild number 3269. I have three to talk about with you today, and then after that we're going to have one more episode, and then I'm done with this series. So this is episode 5 of 6, I guess, and we'll be talking about 3 different mechanisms today. And hopefully that I will be able to give enough time to each. I feel like I ran out a little bit out of time last time. So, all right. So our 3 mechanisms that we're going to discuss today. The first one I want to talk about is roll and write. Now I am here using the broader idea of rand and write, or randomize and write. I like Rado's suggestion of using rand and write, or for a while I was calling them rando writers because I think that's funny, but no one likes that. Rand is a command in a lot of programming languages that allows you to generate a random number. So Rado likes it because it has a connection to programming, but also means sort of universally something that randomizes and then everyone writes things down. Now the classic roll and write, which is the sort of most well-known aspect of the genre, is something like Yahtzee, where you roll your dice a few times, then you write down a choice on your board. And every time you make a choice, you're limiting your future choices. So it's a push your luck game in some ways. You're balancing the choice you're making now against the choices you're cutting off later. There's another subgenre called flip and write, in which instead of using dice, you're using a deck of cards, and you flip that over. I see these games, the mechanisms in the games are so similar that I'm happy to use either one. So I'll go through a few of the roll and writes that I've played, which is quite a few because it's been a big genre lately. And then we'll talk about which is my favorite. So off the top of my head, I can think of there's Yahtzee, there's Quicks, there's Avenue of the Kodama, which used to just be called Avenue. There is Imperial Settlers Roll and Write, Welcome to, with a bunch of expansion maps, and Welcome to Dino World. I think those are the main roll and Cartographers. That's one I've played a lot lately. So when I talk about which is my favorite of those, I think I prefer flip and writes to roll and writes, because roll and writes feel you can too often just get the same result multiple times in a row. And I guess that can happen in flip and writes as well, but there's a limit, there's a more controlled randomization of the options in a flip and write. So I think generally I would prefer a flip and write to a roll and write. It depends on the game. Every one of those games I've named there I think is pretty good. The weakest of the bunch would be Imperial Settlers Roll and Write. I've talked about that a little bit more. What I have not done is explored the solo pad. There's a huge pad of solo options. Each page is different, and I think it would be interesting to work my way through that. Part of me finds it really hard to do that, though, because they're gone. They're ruined. But given that I've played that game hardly at all, working my way through the solo deck, there's a getting used to the idea that, the game doesn't need to last forever. There's no need to waste a lot of money laminating all of the solo sheets, given that I haven't played it at all. So I may give that a try at some point. But, of the games, I would say Cartographers and Welcome To kind of stand out as the clear leaders there in terms of the games I've played. So the ups and downs. Welcome To feels a bit more like... Welcome To uses the choice of numbers and the reduction in choice through limiting your options in what you write. In Welcome To, you are writing house numbers along the street, and every time you choose a house number that you're writing, you're limiting what can be written around it because the house numbers have to go in order from low to high. So if you write a number 6 in the third box, you've now said you can't write anything higher than a 6 to the left of that. Or more importantly, lower than a 6 to the right of it, probably, depending how far over you're writing it. So that is the main limitation in Welcome To. But then you're also trying to decide which bonuses to use on each map with each card. There's a lot of really interesting choices to make in that game, which is part of why I like it. Like a lot of games like that, it has this sort of sliding scale of choices to make. And so deciding which choice you're going to make and which score path you're going to pursue is interesting as well. Cartographers, on the other hand, fits the other genre of flip and write, which is writing shapes. So the two choices that the flip and write genre seems to be making lately are writing numbers and foreclosing your options that way, or writing shapes and foreclosing your options that way. So you'll have a grid and you're going to draw shapes, and the kinds of shapes you draw and the relationships of those shapes to other shapes is what makes the roll and write work. So as I try to determine or explain which of these is my favorite, I think I've got to go Welcome To. I like Cartographers a lot, but the main thing I like about Cartographers is that my wife likes it. I mean, I think it's fun, and I think the different scoring options are interesting for sure. But ultimately, I find it less interesting than Welcome To. And because Welcome To has those expansion maps, of which we have all 5, there's enough variety in the way the game plays to last us for a very long time. So as I'm thinking about the roll and writes I've played, I think Welcome To is the winner. Now, I really do like Welcome to Dino World. My problem with that one is I haven't found anyone else who likes it very much. My daughter thought it was fine, but hasn't asked to play it again, and my wife did not like it. She thought it was too complicated. So my main problem with that one is just finding a group to play with, which is hard. The game is just called Welcome To, which is a bad name. On the box it says Welcome to Your Perfect Home, but the whole point is you get to fill in the name of your little town or your street. So that's my favorite roll and write game. Economic games was the next suggestion. I think this one came from Chris. My first thought was, what do we mean by economic games? Because it's not just a game where you're aiming to make money. It's got to be a game where the economy is a key part of the game. So there's a couple different ways to approach this. I think that the idea of pricing or understanding pricing or manipulating a market has to be part of the game in some way. So on one hand, something like quantitative easing certainly I would say is an economic game, even though it's a bidding game. But because a big part of what you're doing is figuring out what other people are paying and figuring out what you want to pay, then that certainly has to do with an economy. In a similar way, I would say Klondike Rush has that same experience because you're bidding for these different elements of the game and trying to manipulate the other people into paying more for things you don't want and that sort of thing. So that one is certainly an economic game. And then there's games that have actual economies where there are different commodities and their prices go up and down. So something like Clans of Caledonia has six different resources, and the value of those goes up and down over the course of the game as you buy and sell them. The cost for them goes up and down. Similarly, Brass Lancashire has the cotton market that changes as you sell things to it. Brass Birmingham also has these markets, quote unquote markets, but as I recall, you don't really, the amount you get paid for the things you're selling is the same every time. Am I right about that? Yeah, it's based on the place that you're selling it rather than the amount that have been sold. Although it does have a limitation. If you're the first one to sell, you get a bonus. Or in Brass Lancashire, once a certain amount has been sold, then no one else wants to buy any. It's a more bitter pill to swallow, but certainly works. So either of those would, I think, reasonably be called an economic game. And then Power Grid is the other one I've played that has an economy. As you buy, particularly you're sort of fighting for resources and figuring out how much to pay for the power plants that you're buying and so on, how much to spend on powering them. I know there are lots of other economic games out there. I have a copy of Acquire, but I haven't played it, so I'm not going to count that. And I know that 18xx games are heavily economic in terms of controlling stock prices and stuff. The closest I've played to that would be something like Stevenson's Rocket, which has these stocks that you buy, and you can use them to influence the corporation, but every time you use a stock, then you lose power in that corporation. So there's a kind of economy going on there as well. And then I guess you could argue that something like Catan is an economic game in so much as if you're able to corner the market on a resource or able to use a resource to manipulate other people, that feels like working with a market, even though there's not money per se. So those are the games that I'm considering as I think about what's my favorite economic game. And in that regard, I think Clans of Caledonia has got to win it. When I first played Clans of Caledonia, I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was really great, but I've played it a number of times on Board Game Arena in the past few months, and I'm really coming to appreciate the way that it attaches a market economy to what I'd call the Terra Mystica formula. And the combination of those two things makes for a really interesting game. I like that you use your agents to buy things and manipulate the price of those things. The discount, the only thing I don't use very well in that game is the discount for building next to other people. That one I'm not so good at. But so that is Clans of Caledonia and my favorite economic game. So the third mechanism I want to talk about today is route placement. This was another one suggested by Chris, I believe. And I have a variety of games that would fit this. Obviously, the granddaddy of them all is Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride is a route placement game. You are specifically meeting routes to gain points. I like Ticket to Ride Europe better, but that also route placement game. But there are a number of other games that would fit this category. Whistle Stop is a pretty interesting one that I've just gotten recently. I've only played it the once, but I really enjoyed the process of figuring out how your trains are going to move. The big thing is you can use other people's trains, so they're not really your routes. You could argue Power Grid is a route placement game, that you're connecting the different pieces of your power grid together and you're making a route for the power to use, although it's less often that your pieces are going to intermingle with other people's pieces. I'm not sure Catan would qualify as a route placement game. You're certainly building a network, but there's no sense of movement along the route. And so that one isn't as strong. Turn-in Taxis I played recently. That one is also route building. But I think for me, the standout has to be the Martin Wallace Brass games. Brass Lancashire and Brass Birmingham. In both of these games, you have places where you've established factories or mines or ironworks or whatever. And then you have this network of canals, or in the second half, railroads, that connect those different places to each other, to other people's networks, and to ports. And while the game doesn't really reward you for having one route or another, paying attention to what routes other people are building your own routes to particular things like the breweries in Brass Birmingham or the markets in Lancashire, paying attention to when your route connects to the things other people have built so you get the resources. Those are all really interesting and provocative mechanisms, even more so than the market part, which I obviously just brought up Brass in the other conversation. As I think about it, the other game that does this really well is Via Nebula. And in some ways, Via Nebula is even more about building routes than Brass because it's narrower in focus. Because in Brass, you have to worry about money. And in Via Nebula, the money is assumed. All you have to worry about is, do you have the resources to complete the contract? And you're doing that by building routes between your stations and the places where the resources are and the places where the contract is. And there's an interesting interplay between the energy you spend gathering resources and the energy you spend connecting, especially because all the routes are owned by everybody. So if you can use a route to get somewhere, everybody gets it. You know, in that same way, I haven't played it yet, but I've been reading the rules for Founders of Gloomhaven, which also has this idea of this network that you'd build, or this route that you'd build. There might be some of you sticklers out there who are saying route is an important aspect of this, the idea that you are traveling along the path. And so building a network is different than building a route. But I'm not willing to concede that point today. In part because if you say I have to only build routes, then really Ticket to Ride is the only answer I have for you. And I don't want to say Ticket to Ride, I don't think. Though maybe I should. Maybe this isn't route building. Maybe what I'm talking about is network building. It's tricky. The thing is, I do really like Ticket to Ride. So if I'm talking about route building directly, maybe I should say Ticket to Ride and save Brass and Via Nebula for network building. At least Brass. Via Nebula, it really is about routes. Because as soon as you connect your city to a particular thing, you get all the stuff from that place that you need. You don't necessarily have to... You don't have to maintain that route, I guess, is what I'm saying. Oh, it's a tough decision. I'm going to say Brass Lancashire. I think the interplay, particularly in Lancashire, between where your places are connected, your network, and the routes you can take to get to a place, paying attention to how far away the coal is from the thing you're using. All of this has to do with planning and building routes. And it's all tied to the cards you have and how you use those cards. So I find that really compelling. And perhaps there's an argument to be made that this is about a network and not a route. And so those should be different categories. But I'm not giving in to that thought. I'm going to go Brass Lancashire as my favorite route building game. So what is your favorite? Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know, or reach out to me. I'm Wombat929 on Board Game Geek, or you can email me, Brendan at Rattlebox Games. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope that you'll join us next time for the final episode of my top game of a bunch of game mechanisms that were suggested by people in the guild. All right, thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.